When does the 20-second start?
It started.
Now it's started. Okay. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to Soundscapes. Very quick introduction to Soundscapes. We're going to talk a little bit about what a soundscape is, a little bit about what we're doing here at Salford, or what we've done in the past, and a little bit about my work to wrap up. And I'm going to take you on a... Oh, shit. That is quick. It's on camera as well. And a little bit about the work that we've carried out, and I think it's going to kind of filter through to the other speakers are going to talk a bit about more how the work that we've done subsequently to the work that we've done here. So what is a soundscape? Well, a lot of work has gone into this, and recently the ISO have formed a working group to get together and actually come down with an actual definition, because up until now there's been a lot of confusion about what a soundscape actually is. And those definitions have come from a whole range of subjects, such as the arts having their own definition, a lot of musicians having their own definition, and a lot of kind of acousticians having a definition. One of the main people was a musician who's kind of associated with soundscapes, and his name is Murray Schafer. He's a famous Canadian. He wrote the kind of Bible on soundscapes called The Tuning of the World. But actually, soundscape had actually been used prior to Schafer coming around by someone called Southworth in the 60s in a psychology journal. His name was Southworth, and he wrote in his journal Environment and Behaviour about the fact that a soundscape was the sound environment of a city, which obviously being a city is not actually correct, because a soundscape is something which is surrounding us all the time. I'm talking quite fast, aren't I? So some people might like to think of a soundscape as a landscape, but oh my God. Okay, this is really difficult, isn't it? Musicians have been writing about actually creating soundscapes and designing soundscapes. Think about Vivaldi trying to describe spring in music, but this really came around in the Romantic era of music in the 18th century, where people started to give pieces of music, rather than just Opus 1, Sonata 12, they started to give music kind of titles, like La Mer, Debussy's La Mer, kind of trying to describe in music the sound environment they are in. And this kind of got through to its literal confusion in the 20th century with modernism, where artists actually, John Cage most famously, writing 4 minutes 33 seconds, which was
Absolute zero.
Absolute nothing, listening to the soundscape we're in. So it got to its logical conclusion there. We also had artists like Steve Reich using music and actual sound objects, Pierre Schaeffer as well, another person using sound objects to create a soundscape. And this then moved on even more into the kind of film world, where sound is obviously incredibly... The soundscape of a film is one of the most important things, probably more important than the visual. And George Lucas kind of acknowledged this. And this is where we get into the art of sound design. And we're actually taking the kind of musical concept and we're designing a soundscape to match a visual. And this is what and this was a kind of something to bear in mind. Actually, John here would probably pick up on this, as someone who maybe watches films that haven't come from a legitimate source, filmed with maybe a camcorder or something like that. If the sound is really bad, you're more liable to turn it off than if you've got a slightly bad picture. So it just goes to show the importance of sound. I can't remember what my next slide is. So does this kind of concept of designing sound, creating a sound environment, can we apply this to architecture and design? And that was the kind of work that I was quite interested in, and figuring out how we can take this design and apply it to an urban, or perhaps an urban environment. So why always noise? A lot of acoustics and a lot of social policy and a lot of kind of council policies relate to noise. Noise is the term that's used. They never describe sound in a positive way. We only ever think about noise. We ever think about the bad things. So it was around 2006, 2007, there was a large impetus towards thinking about soundscape, bringing together lots of different academic disciplines to get together and see if we could look for commonality between all the different subjects. And I've gone off now, so I'm just going to talk. So the Positive Soundscapes project was formed, and this brought together disciplines such as acoustics here at Salford, psychology, physiology, neuroscience, artists, product designers from Warwick. And it was one of the largest funded projects in acoustics, because we've got about £1 million funding for this project. And the idea was to try and bring together all our disciplines and kind of come up with a new methodology for assessing soundscapes. And how do we do this? Well, I've jumped ahead, and sound walking is one way. We can. This is the way that I kind of developed with another researcher here, Mags Adams, who isn't here today, and field recording. I'll talk a little bit about soundscapes, sound walking, because that's quite important to what I did. It was taking people around a city and getting them to listen and then interviewing them about what they'd actually heard. And what we were also trying to do was to get away from this kind of negative connotation of noise and trying to pick out what people thought were as important in their soundscape and see if we potentially could design this in the future. Another way we did this was field recording, and that's pretty self-explanatory. And this was the kind of basic methodology we used. So I did get a graph in. So we split the two methodology. We had qualitative and quantitative methods, and the idea was, in a sense, to try and bring the two together. So the qualitative, we looked at field work. That was going out doing sound walks. It was doing questionnaires and interviews, focus groups as well. And on the qualitative side, we developed a soundscape simulator. I think Charlie's probably going to talk about a bit more about some of the kind of quantitative and the fantastic thing that Charlie did with and Ian as well. So what came out of this? From my work, it showed that perception is based on a number of factors. There's an expectation of the sound environment we have, and that kind of relates back as well to the film world, where I didn't get enough time to talk about that, but we have an expectation of how a scene in a film should look and how it should sound. And this can actually is applicable to the real world as well. That expectation goes beyond the basic acoustics of a space. It also goes on to the kind of social behaviour of people who occupy that space and what we expect within that space. There are a lot of place norms, and these basically relate to the context of the space. If I'm in a coffee shop, I go in there with a purpose, probably to have a cup of coffee, and I know what to expect in that environment. And if something goes beyond what I expect in that environment, this is an example. I'm doing the coffee shop example at the right time. We're kind of content, and we've got a kind of balance about the things that we do expect within that environment. Now, if something goes beyond our expectation, or something or someone, importantly, for example, and this is a quote from an interview transcript, I didn't like the tramp in the park. That then started to give people a negative perception of the space they were in. So it's not about the acoustic level, which is something we've tried to measure in the past. There are other factors which come into play. Parting thoughts, yeah. What we kind of discovered is that people have, an expectation of the space that they're in. This is based on not only the acoustic design of the space, it's about what they want to do in that space, how much control they have over the space. Sound annoyance isn't related particularly to level, because people loved London. They loved Oxford Street. When you interviewed them on Oxford Street, they loved the sound and the vibrancy. Now, Oxford Street is horrendously loud. But they could be annoyed by a dripping tap, which acoustically is very, very quiet. So it's all about the context. It's all about control. I've got time for one question, just one. I never want to do this again.
How do you know it's really the soundscape at all you're looking at and measuring when you're talking about the tramp? How do you normalise out all the other things?
Well, it's kind of impossible, really, because it's such a multi-dimensional problem. But the biggest thing to do with annoyance was, in a sense, the ability to control the environment. Now, the easiest thing with a tramp in that space was to actually move out of that space, and having the freedom to move out of that space, and it therefore didn't have a negative impact on the perception of the soundscape. Yet, if you were forced into that space and you didn't like the people who are in there, your annoyance factor would become a lot higher. And I've just used the term annoyance factor, which doesn't exist, but you become more annoyed, such as, the neighbours who you don't like would annoy you more than the neighbours you do like, playing perhaps the same kind of music. It's your ability then to be able to go next door and tell those neighbours to turn down, rather than perhaps having a confrontation with neighbours you don't like. So it's your ability to control that source, your ability to move away. And that's really important, for example, in the idea of Oxford Street, or when we did the work on Deansgate. The ability, a lot of people said they love the hustle and bustle or the vibrancy of the space, but they also love the ability that they could at any point walk off of that road and find a quieter space. Now, if you're confined to just being on Oxford Street, then you're annoyed. You're more likely to be annoyed, particularly if you're trying to receive some information. If the information message, such as a phone call or an announcement from a PA system, if you can't hear that, then you're more liable to be annoyed. I'm not sure if that's answered your question. Am I done?
Okay, thanks very much.